Most people think success is about talent, intelligence, or luck. It's not. It's about control, emotional control, the ability to stay calm when others panic, to think clearly when others react, to read people when they're busy trying to impress you. Emotional intelligence is not soft, it's not passive, it's not optional, it is a tactical advantage. And in a world driven by distraction, ego, and impulse, the person who masters their emotions quietly takes control of every room, every decision, and every outcome. This audiobook will train you to become that person. Chapter 1. Stop reacting. Start observing. Most people don't think they have a reaction problem. They think they have an honesty problem. They say things like, "I just say what I feel. I'm just being real. That's how I am." No, that's not honesty. That's lack of control. Reaction is not authenticity. Reaction is conditioning. You were trained to respond instantly. Instant reply to messages. Instant opinion. Instant defense. Instant anger. Instant explanation. You've been rewarded your whole life for speed. But emotional intelligence is built on something completely different. It's built on restraint. You have a choice. That's the first thing you must understand. Between what happens to you and what you do next, there is space. A small space. A powerful space. That space is where emotional intelligence lives. Most people never use it. They collapse that space to zero. Someone criticizes them. They fire back. Someone interrupts them. They raise their voice. Someone sends a short email. They assume disrespect. Someone disagrees. They take it personally. Reaction feels natural. But natural is not the same as effective. You are not here to be natural. You are here to be deliberate. Pause is power. Say that again. Pause is power. The person who pauses controls the outcome. The person who reacts surrenders it. This is not theory. This is observable behavior in every workplace, every relationship, every negotiation. Watch two professionals in the same situation. One gets challenged in a meeting and responds immediately. They talk fast. They defend themselves. They interrupt. They explain too much. They think they're showing confidence, but everyone in the room sees something else. They see insecurity. They see emotional leakage. They see someone being driven instead of driving. Now watch the emotionally intelligent professional. They hear the same challenge, but they don't rush. They breathe. They look at the person speaking. They take a second. That second changes everything, because now they're not reacting. They're choosing. They respond calmly. Fewer words, clear tone, no defensiveness, and suddenly they own the room. Not because they were louder, because they were steadier. That's the difference. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need their permission to think. You've been conditioned to believe silence is weakness. It's not. Silence is processing. Silence is evaluation. Silence is control. Pause is power. Let's talk about what's actually happening neurologically. When something triggers you, your brain wants speed. It wants to protect your ego. It wants to defend identity. It wants to eliminate discomfort immediately. So it pushes you to act fast. But fast action is usually emotional action. And emotional action is rarely intelligent action. Emotional intelligence requires inserting friction into that moment, a deliberate slowdown. This is called the emotional gap. The emotional gap is the space between stimulus and response. That space is where leaders are built. That space is where reputation is built. That space is where trust is built. You don't need more intelligence, you need more gap. Right now, your gap might be half a second. We are going to stretch it, because the size of that gap determines the quality of your life. Small gap, impulsive decisions, damaged relationships, regret. Large gap, clear thinking, strategic action. Respect, you have a choice. Let's make this practical. Starting today, you stop answering immediately. Not emails, not criticism, not tension. You don't rush to fill silence. When someone says something that irritates you, your only job is to notice the irritation, not act on it. Notice it. That's the discipline. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about observing emotion. There's a massive difference. Suppression says, "I shouldn't feel this." Observation says, "Interesting, I feel this." One creates pressure. The other creates awareness. Awareness gives you options, and options give you control. Pause is power. Here's another truth most people don't want to hear. The faster you speak, the less people trust you. Because speed signals emotion, and emotion signals instability. Measured speech signals thought. Thought signals authority. This is why experienced negotiators slow conversations down. This is why elite performers pause before answering questions. This is why confident people never rush explanations. They're not trying to sound smart, they're managing the emotional frame. You don't need their permission to take your time. Let's examine a common failure pattern. You receive a message that feels disrespectful, short, direct, no greeting. Your brain fills in the story instantly. They're being rude. They don't value me. I need to respond. So you type quickly. You match their tone. You defend your position. Now you've escalated something that never required escalation. Later, you realize they were just busy. This is how reaction quietly damages your credibility. Emotionally intelligent people don't complete stories. They gather data. They ask, what do I actually know? Not what do I feel? What do I know? That's the key. You move from emotional assumption to behavioral observation. Watch behavior, not words. Words can be careless. Behavior reveals patterns, and observation requires patience. Reaction is loud. Observation is quiet. Reaction wants closure. Observation wants clarity. You must decide which one you want to live by. You have a choice. Let's talk about identity for a moment. Right now, you might see yourself as someone who reacts quickly, someone passionate, someone expressive. That identity has cost you more than you realize, because emotional intelligence is not about personality, it's about discipline. It's not about being calm naturally, it's about practicing calm intentionally. That means you train the pause. You train it in small moments, so it's available in big moments. When someone interrupts you, pause. When traffic frustrates you, pause. When you want to correct someone instantly, pause. You are building a reflex. Most people train reaction. You are training response. And over time, this changes how people experience you. They stop seeing you as reactive. They start seeing you as grounded. Grounded people get trusted. Trusted people get influence. Influence is not built by talking more. It's built by reacting less. Pause is power. Let's go deeper. Reaction is often an attempt to protect ego. Observation is an attempt to understand reality. One is emotional self-defense. The other is strategic awareness. You cannot be defensive and perceptive at the same time, so you must choose. Do you want to feel right, or do you want to be effective? You have a choice. Emotionally intelligent individuals delay judgment. They don't label situations instantly. They don't assume intention. They don't rush interpretation. They collect information first. And because they collect information, they make fewer mistakes. Fewer mistakes means more confidence. More confidence means less emotional volatility. This is how control compounds. It's not dramatic, it's incremental, but it changes everything. Here's your practical assignment. For the next 24 hours, you do one thing differently. You wait 3 seconds before responding to anything emotionally charged. 3 seconds. That's it. You don't explain the pause. You don't apologize for the pause. You just take it. Those 3 seconds will feel uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort means you're interrupting conditioning, and in those 3 seconds, you ask one question. What response would the most controlled version of me choose? Not what feels right, what is effective. That question rewires behavior. Because emotional intelligence is not built in seminars. It's built in moments like this. Small, invisible, repeated. Pause is power. Once you begin observing instead of reacting, something surprising happens. You start seeing how reactive everyone else is. You notice interruptions, defensiveness, emotional leakage, and instead of being pulled into it, you remain separate. That separation is the beginning of mastery. You are no longer inside every emotional wave. You are watching the waves, and the person who can watch the wave can choose when to move. That's emotional intelligence. That's control. That's your advantage. You stopped reacting. You started observing. Now we build on that awareness, because once you can see your emotions clearly, you must learn how to interpret them correctly. Observation without understanding is not enough. You created the gap. Now you must learn how to use it. Chapter 2. Your emotions are data, not commands. Now that you've created the pause, you're standing in a place most people never reach. You are no longer reacting instantly. You are observing. But observation alone is not mastery. Because once you notice the emotion, the next mistake people make is believing it. They assume, if I feel it, it must be true. If I feel angry, something is wrong. If I feel nervous, I'm not ready. If I feel disrespected, I've been attacked. That assumption destroys clarity. Your emotions are not commands. They are information, data, nothing more. And data must be interpreted, not obeyed. That's the key. Emotionally unintelligent people treat emotions like instructions. Emotionally intelligent people treat emotions like signals on a dashboard. A warning light on your car is not telling you to panic. It's telling you to check something. Same with emotion. Anger is not telling you to attack. It's telling you to examine expectations. Anxiety is not telling you to avoid. It's telling you to prepare. Discomfort is not telling you to stop. It's telling you you're growing. You have a choice. You can obey the feeling, or you can analyze it. Most people obey. That's why their behavior is predictable. And predictable behavior is easy to manipulate, easy to ignore, and easy to outmaneuver. But once you treat emotions as data, you become difficult to control. Let's break this down practically. Imagine you receive critical feedback at work. Your emotional brain immediately generates heat, tension, defensiveness, the urge to explain yourself. That urge feels urgent. It feels justified. But that's not truth. That's chemistry. Your body released a stress response. That's all. If you act from that state, you are not deciding. You are reacting biologically. Emotionally intelligent people do something different. They label the emotion, and labeling creates distance. Instead of saying, "This is unfair," they say, "I'm feeling defensive." That small shift is powerful, because now the emotion is an object you can examine, not a force controlling you. Name it, slow it, control it. Say that again. Name it, slow it, control it. Neuroscience backs this up. When you label an emotion, you reduce its intensity. You literally change brain activity. But you don't need neuroscience to see the result. You see it in composed professionals every day. They are not emotionless. They are interpreters. They feel frustration, but they ask, "What is this telling me?" They feel pressure, but they ask, "What needs preparation?" They feel uncertainty, but they ask, "What information am I missing?" That's emotional intelligence in action. It's not about feeling less. It's about understanding more. Let's talk about one of the most dangerous emotional misinterpretations: anger. People treat anger like proof. Proof they've been wronged. Proof they must respond. Proof they must correct someone immediately. But anger is rarely about the present moment. Anger is usually about violated expectations. Something didn't go the way you imagined it would. So, your brain signals resistance. That's data, not an order to speak louder, not an order to send that message, not an order to prove your point. You don't need their permission to stay silent while you process. You don't need their permission to think before acting. Remember this: it's not about emotion, it's about interpretation. Two people can feel the same emotion and produce completely different outcomes. One feels pressure and shuts down. The other feels pressure and sharpens focus. The difference is meaning. Emotionally intelligent people assign useful meaning. They ask one question consistently: how can this help me respond better? That question converts emotion into strategy. You have a choice. Here's another common failure. People say, "I'm stressed," as if that explains behavior. Stress is not an explanation. It's a signal. If you stop at the label, you stay stuck. If you investigate, you gain leverage. What exactly is causing the stress? Unclear priorities, lack of preparation, fear of judgment? Once identified, the emotion becomes actionable. Without that step, emotions stay overwhelming. This is why many talented people remain inconsistent. They are ruled by emotional weather. Good mood, they perform. Bad mood, they stall. That's not intelligence, that's dependence. Emotional intelligence removes mood from the equation. You act based on values and decisions, not feelings. It's not about how you feel today, it's about what matters today. That's discipline. And discipline is far more reliable than motivation. Let's ground this in behavior you can train immediately. From now on, every time you feel a strong emotion, you do 3 things. First, you name it precisely. Not, "I feel bad." That's vague. You say, "I feel frustrated because progress is slow." Precision weakens emotional intensity. Second, you ask what triggered it, not who. What? Was it lack of clarity? Expectation mismatch? Fatigue? Now you're diagnosing instead of reacting. Third, you decide whether action is required. Many emotions require no action at all. That's something most people never learn. They think every feeling demands response. It doesn't. Sometimes the most intelligent move is to do nothing. Pause is power. Analysis is power. Restraint is power. And once you build this habit, something changes internally. You stop fearing emotions because you realize they cannot control you unless you let them. Confidence grows from that realization. not confidence in outcomes, confidence in self-management. You trust yourself to handle situations because you know you won't react blindly. That trust is the foundation of composure, and composure is noticed. People may not understand why they trust you more, they just do. Because you don't escalate unnecessarily, you don't collapse under pressure, you don't let emotion distort judgment, you process, then you act, name it, slow it, control it. Let's go further. Emotional intelligence also means recognizing when emotions are lying. Yes, lying. Your brain is wired for survival, not accuracy. It exaggerates threats. It predicts rejection. It assumes worst-case scenarios. That's useful if you're avoiding danger. It's terrible if you're trying to lead, decide, or grow. So you must challenge emotional narratives. Just because you feel unprepared doesn't mean you are. Just because you feel judged doesn't mean you are. Just because you feel uncertain doesn't mean you should stop. You don't eliminate emotion, you cross-examine it. That's maturity, that's control. And that's why emotional intelligence is a superpower. Because once you stop obeying emotions, you start using them. They guide attention, they reveal priorities, they highlight areas needing growth. They become tools instead of obstacles. But only if you refuse to treat them as authority. You have a choice. You can let emotions dictate behavior, or you can let them inform behavior. One leads to impulsive living, the other leads to intentional living. Now you understand your emotions are data, but emotional intelligence isn't only internal. It becomes exponentially more powerful when applied outward. Once you stop misreading your own emotions, you begin to see how others misread theirs, and that awareness allows you to navigate conversations, conflict, and influence with precision. You've learned to interpret the signal inside you. Now you must learn to recognize emotional patterns in the world around you. Chapter 3. The calm person controls the room. Walk into any high-pressure situation, a tense meeting, a negotiation, a disagreement, a deadline crisis. At first it looks like everyone has equal influence. They don't. There is always one person setting the emotional tone, and it is almost never the loudest person. It is the calmest one. That's not personality. That's emotional physics. Human beings mirror each other automatically. We absorb signals without realizing it. Posture, tone, pace, breathing, expression. This is called emotional contagion. And whether you know it or not, you are either spreading calm or spreading chaos. You have a choice. Most people walk into environments and get infected by the emotional state already there. Stress in the room, they become stressed. Frustration in the room, they become sharp. Urgency in the room, they start rushing. They adapt unconsciously. Emotionally intelligent people do the opposite. They enter a room and decide what emotional state they will bring with them. They don't absorb the environment, they influence it. That's the key. Control yourself, and you begin to control the space around you. Let's make this real. Imagine a leader facing a project failure. An emotionally reactive leader raises their voice, speaks quickly, demands answers, interrupts. They think intensity will fix the problem. Instead, they shrink the thinking capacity of everyone around them. Because anxiety kills creativity, fear kills clarity, pressure without control kills performance. Now imagine a calm leader in the exact same situation. They slow the conversation down. They ask precise questions. They don't rush to blame. They don't dramatize the setback. Their calm doesn't ignore the problem. It creates the conditions to solve it. People think better, speak more clearly, offer solutions faster. The calm person didn't just manage themselves, they upgraded everyone else. That is influence. And influence is impossible without emotional regulation. Pause is power. Let's address a misconception. Calm does not mean passive. Calm does not mean weak. Calm does not mean you lack urgency. Calm means your urgency is directed, not scattered. You can move fast without being frantic. You can be firm without being emotional. You can be intense without being unstable. That's emotional intelligence in motion. You don't need their permission to slow the tempo. In fact, slowing the tempo often puts you in charge. Watch experienced attorneys in a courtroom. Watch seasoned executives during negotiations. Watch elite athletes in critical moments. They don't speed up under pressure. They become deliberate. Because speed is contagious, but so is steadiness. And steadiness wins more often. You must understand this deeply. People trust the nervous person less. People follow the grounded person more. Not consciously, instinctively. Our brains associate calm with competence. So when you regulate yourself, you are communicating credibility without saying a word. That's the silent advantage emotional intelligence gives you. Let's talk about what happens internally when you remain calm while others escalate. You create contrast, and contrast is powerful. If two people argue and one stays composed, observers automatically assign authority to the composed one, even if they say less, even if they are younger, even if they hold less formal power, because emotional stability signals control, and control signals leadership. This is why reacting emotionally often costs more than being wrong. You can recover from a mistake. You rarely recover from looking unsteady. That's why this discipline matters. It's not about suppressing personality. It's about managing signal. Every action you take sends a signal. Every reaction you show sends a louder one. You must decide what signal you want to broadcast. You have a choice. Let's build the behavior. From now on, when you enter any environment, you ask yourself one question: what emotional tone will I set here? Not, what will I say? Not, how will they respond? What tone will you set? This shifts you from participant to regulator. You stop chasing emotional momentum. You start directing it. Here's a practical exercise. Lower your speaking speed by 10%. That's it. You don't need new vocabulary. You don't need rehearsed authority. Just slow down. When you speak slightly slower, 3 things happen. You think more clearly. Others listen more carefully. The room subconsciously adjusts to your pace. You become the reference point. That's emotional leadership. And it works even if you're not in charge, because authority is often behavioral, not positional. You don't need their permission to embody calm. Another key behavior: eliminate unnecessary urgency from your body language. No rushing to interrupt, no frantic gestures, no exaggerated reactions. Stillness communicates confidence. This is why elite communicators use controlled movement. They understand that motion equals emotion. Less motion, more control, more influence. This is not performance, it's discipline. It's not about pretending to be calm. It's about training your nervous system not to spike unnecessarily. And that training happens outside high-stakes moments. You practice calm while driving, while waiting in line, while handling small frustrations. If you can't stay composed in minor inconvenience, you won't stay composed in major pressure. Emotional intelligence is built in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. Let's address another reality. Some people will try to pull you out of this calm state. They will escalate, push emotionally, demand quick reactions. Because emotional people are uncomfortable around emotional control, it removes their leverage. Your job is not to match them. Your job is to remain anchored. You don't absorb their storm. You let it pass. You have a choice. And when you maintain that choice consistently, something shifts in how people deal with you. They stop trying to provoke. They start communicating more clearly. They adjust. Because your stability forces adaptation. This is how emotional intelligence reshapes environments over time. You don't dominate the room, you regulate it. That's the difference between force and presence. Force demands attention, presence earns it. And presence is built on one thing repeated over and over: controlled response. Pause is power. Now you understand how mastering your internal state begins to influence the external world. But to truly operate at a high level, you must sharpen another skill, because staying calm is only half the equation. You must also become skilled at reading the emotional patterns of others without getting pulled into them. You've learned to control your signal. Now it's time to interpret theirs. Chapter 4. Learn to read people who don't say what they mean. Here is a truth most people discover too late. Communication is rarely about the words being spoken. People say one thing, they feel another. They intend something else entirely. If you only listen to language, you miss the message. If you observe behavior, you see the truth. Emotionally intelligent people don't just hear. They watch. They measure. They interpret. That's the key. You are not trying to become suspicious. You are training yourself to become accurate. Because in real life, meaning leaks through tone, timing, posture, hesitation, and consistency far more than vocabulary. Words are edited. Behavior is not. Watch behavior, not words. Say that again. Watch behavior, not words. Let's slow this down. Imagine someone says, "That's fine." 2 simple words. But those words can mean agreement, frustration, dismissal, or quiet resistance depending on delivery. If you react to the literal phrase, you misunderstand the situation. If you observe the emotional signal, you understand it. Most people miss this because they are too busy preparing their own response. They are not observing, they are waiting to talk, and that habit destroys awareness. You have a choice. You can enter conversations to express, or you can enter conversations to understand. Emotionally intelligent individuals prioritize understanding first, because once you understand emotional context, your response becomes precise instead of reactive. Let's talk about the most common signals people overlook. Changes in pace. When someone suddenly speaks faster, they are often defending something. When they slow down, they are choosing words carefully. When they hesitate, there is uncertainty or discomfort. These are not random variations, they are emotional indicators, but you only notice them if you are not rushing yourself. Pause is power. Your stillness gives you perception. Here's another signal: inconsistency. Someone says they're confident, but their behavior shows avoidance. They claim alignment, but delay action. They express agreement, but their tone lacks conviction. Emotionally intelligent people track patterns, not statements. Anyone can say the right thing once. Behavior repeated over time tells the truth. You don't need their permission to observe quietly. In fact, observation is strongest when it's invisible. You're not interrogating, you're noticing. That distinction matters. Let's apply this in a professional environment. You propose an idea in a meeting. One colleague immediately agrees, but avoids eye contact and doesn't build on the discussion. An emotionally reactive person assumes support and moves forward blindly. An emotionally intelligent person recognizes hesitation. So instead of pushing harder, they ask a neutral question. What concerns should we address before moving ahead? Now the real conversation begins. Observation created space for honesty. That's influence without pressure. It's not about manipulation, it's about awareness. And awareness prevents misalignment before it becomes conflict. That's why emotional intelligence saves enormous time and energy. You solve problems earlier because you see them earlier. Watch behavior, not words. Another critical element is emotional mirroring. People unconsciously reveal how they feel about you through alignment. If they lean in, they are engaged. If they angle away, they are distancing. If their tone matches yours, they are comfortable. If it shifts sharply, something changed. These cues are subtle but constant. The problem is, most people are too internally noisy to notice them. They're thinking about their next argument, their next defense, their next impression. You must reduce that internal noise, because you cannot read others if you are consumed with yourself. Emotional intelligence requires outward attention. Let's address a mistake people make when they start learning this skill. They try to analyze everything. That creates stiffness. This is not about overthinking. It's about being present enough to notice patterns naturally. Observation should feel calm, not forced. You're not decoding secrets, you're paying attention. There's a difference, and over time, this attention becomes instinctive. You begin sensing tension before it's spoken, resistance before it's declared, alignment before it's confirmed. That instinct is not magic, it's trained awareness. You have a choice. You can move through conversations blindly, or you can move through them perceptively. Let's talk about emotional self-protection. When you learn to read behavior, you also learn when not to absorb someone's emotional state. Someone else's frustration does not have to become your frustration. Someone else's urgency does not have to dictate your speed. Someone else's insecurity does not require your reaction. Observation creates distance. Distance creates control. This is why emotionally intelligent people rarely get pulled into unnecessary conflict. They see the emotion coming. They don't step into it. They respond to the situation, not the emotional bait attached to it. You don't need their permission to remain grounded while they escalate. And often, when you don't escalate, the situation de-escalates on its own. Because emotional reactions need participation to survive. Without participation, they lose momentum. That's a powerful advantage. Let's make this practical again. From now on, in every conversation, give yourself one silent assignment. Notice one thing beyond the words. Maybe it's tone, maybe timing, maybe body language, maybe consistency. Just one observation. This trains your brain to widen its awareness without overwhelming you. Small repetitions build lasting perception, and as that perception strengthens, something important happens. You stop taking things personally. because you begin seeing behavior as information, not attack. That shift alone eliminates enormous emotional waste. You stop reacting to imagined meanings. You respond to observable reality. That's clarity. And clarity is calm. Now you're not just controlling your emotions, you're understanding the emotional landscape around you. But there's still a major internal obstacle left to remove. Because even if you can read others accurately, you will lose this advantage if you are still driven by one powerful need, the need to be liked. And that need distorts perception more than any emotion. You've learned to observe. Now you must learn to detach. Chapter 5. Detach from the need to be liked. There is one emotional habit that quietly destroys clarity, confidence, and decision-making more than almost anything else. The need to be liked. It looks harmless. It even looks positive. People call it being nice, being cooperative, being easy to work with. But underneath, it is often fear. Fear of disapproval, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not belonging, and fear makes you adjust your behavior emotionally instead of acting intentionally. That's the problem. When you need to be liked, you stop observing reality. You start managing impressions. And once you start managing impressions, you lose emotional independence. You have a choice. You can act based on what is right, or you can act based on what will be accepted. You cannot do both consistently. Emotionally intelligent people choose respect over approval, because approval is emotional. Respect is behavioral. Approval can change by the hour. Respect is built through consistency. Let's make this clear. When you seek approval, you hesitate to speak directly. You soften necessary feedback. You agree when you should question. You delay decisions to avoid discomfort. You believe you are maintaining harmony. In reality, you are creating confusion. Because people trust clarity more than they trust agreeableness. They may like agreeable individuals in the short term, but they rely on clear individuals in the long term. And emotional intelligence is about being reliable, not pleasing. You don't need their permission to be steady. You don't need their permission to be honest without being emotional. That's the key distinction. Detachment from approval is not aggression. It's alignment. You are aligning your actions with values instead of reactions. Let's examine what happens internally when approval drives behavior. You begin scanning constantly. Did they like that? Did I say it correctly? Should I adjust? Was that too direct? This mental noise destroys presence. You cannot observe others clearly if you are obsessing over their opinion of you. Approval seeking turns your attention inward at the exact moment it should be outward, and when attention collapses inward, emotional intelligence collapses with it. Because now you are reacting to imagined judgments instead of actual behavior. It's not about connection, it's about validation. And validation is unstable fuel. You must replace it with something stronger. Self-regulation. Pause is power. When you no longer rush to secure approval, you gain time to think. When you gain time to think, your responses become deliberate. When your responses become deliberate, people begin trusting your consistency. That's how authority develops quietly. Let's talk about a real-world example. A manager must give corrective feedback to a strong but difficult employee. An approval-driven manager delays the conversation, softens the message, adds unnecessary reassurance, hopes the issue resolves itself. It doesn't. The behavior continues. Respect declines. Frustration builds on both sides. Now contrast that with an emotionally intelligent manager. They regulate their discomfort first. They don't rush. They don't avoid. They address the issue directly, calmly, and specifically. No emotional charge. No need to be liked in that moment. Just clarity. And because the message is stable, it's easier to receive. That's emotional intelligence in action. It's not about being harsh, it's about being clean. Clean communication comes from emotional detachment, not emotional avoidance. You have a choice. You can trade short-term comfort for long-term credibility, or long-term credibility for short-term comfort. Emotionally intelligent people invest in credibility. Because credibility compounds, approval expires quickly. Let's go deeper. The need to be liked often comes from misunderstanding what relationships actually require. Strong relationships are not built on constant agreement. They are built on predictability and trust. People don't need you to agree with everything. They need you to be emotionally stable. They need to know you won't overreact. They need to know you won't say yes just to avoid tension. They need to know your responses are grounded, not strategic attempts to win favor. That stability creates psychological safety far more than politeness ever could. So detaching from approval doesn't weaken relationships, it strengthens them. Because now your behavior is honest and regulated instead of adaptive and anxious. Watch behavior, not words. If someone only values you when you agree, that is not respect. That is conditional acceptance. Emotional intelligence means you stop performing for acceptance. You start acting with intention. Now, this does not mean you ignore empathy. Empathy is still essential, but empathy without boundaries becomes emotional absorption. You feel what others feel. You adjust excessively. You lose objectivity. Emotionally intelligent empathy is different. You understand emotions without surrendering to them. You acknowledge concerns without inheriting them. You listen fully, but you decide independently. That balance is rare, and rarity creates influence. You don't need their permission to hold that balance. Let's translate this into behavior you can train immediately. The next time you feel the urge to say yes just to maintain comfort, pause. Ask yourself, am I choosing this, or am I trying to avoid disapproval? That question exposes motive, and once motive is visible, you can choose differently. You don't need to become confrontational. You simply become honest and calm. I see it differently. Let's examine another option. I'm not aligned with that approach. No emotional charge, no apology for having a perspective, just clarity. Over time, people begin adjusting their expectations of you. They stop expecting automatic agreement. They start engaging with you more thoughtfully, because emotional steadiness commands attention. Approval-seeking invites dismissal. This is why detachment is not isolation, it's discipline. It's not about pushing people away. It's about removing emotional dependence from your decision-making process. And when dependence disappears, confidence grows naturally. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need reinforcement. The kind that allows you to observe, think, and act without emotional interference. That confidence is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence, because now your emotions are not tied to how you are received. They are tied to how you behave. You control the only variable that matters, your response. You have a choice. And once you remove the need to be liked, you unlock something even more powerful. You begin hearing your own internal voice more clearly. But that voice must also be trained. Because if your internal dialogue is chaotic, it will sabotage every external skill you've built so far. You've detached from outside approval. Now it's time to master the conversation happening inside your own mind. Chapter 6. Control your inner dialogue, or it will control you. You can master your reactions. You can read other people accurately. You can detach from approval. But if your internal voice is undisciplined, all of that collapses under pressure. Because the most powerful emotional influence in your life is not external, it's internal. The conversation you have with yourself all day long. Most people are not aware of this conversation, but it never stops. It comments, it predicts, it judges, it exaggerates, it replays mistakes, it invents problems that don't exist yet. And if you don't control that voice, it will control your emotional state. That's the key. Emotional intelligence is not just about managing visible reactions. It's about managing invisible narratives. You have a choice. You can let your mind run commentary, or you can direct it. Let's look at what happens when inner dialogue is left unmanaged. Something goes wrong, and the mind says, "This always happens. I'm behind. They probably think I'm incompetent. I should have handled that differently." Notice the pattern. These thoughts are not facts. They are interpretations, and interpretations shape emotion instantly. If the interpretation is dramatic, the emotion becomes dramatic. If the interpretation is focused, the emotion becomes manageable. So emotional intelligence requires cognitive discipline. It's not about stopping thoughts. That's impossible. It's about correcting them. Replace drama with direction. Say that again. Replace drama with direction. When something doesn't go as planned, emotionally reactive thinking asks, "Why is this happening to me?" Emotionally intelligent thinking asks, "What's the next move?" One question creates frustration, the other creates momentum. This shift sounds simple, but it must be practiced deliberately, because your brain prefers familiar thinking, even when it's unhelpful. You don't need their permission to change how you interpret events. Let's ground this in a real situation. You send an important message and don't receive a response. An undisciplined inner voice immediately starts speculating. They're ignoring me. Maybe I said something wrong. This is going badly. Now emotion rises based on imagination, not reality. You've created stress out of uncertainty. Emotionally intelligent individuals interrupt that pattern. They say, "No response yet. That's all I know." Nothing added, nothing assumed, just facts. And because they stay with facts, their emotional state remains stable. That stability allows better decisions later. This is how inner dialogue directly affects performance. It's not about positive thinking. It's about accurate thinking. Positive thinking can still be emotional. Accurate thinking is grounded. Accuracy keeps you calm. Calm keeps you effective. You have a choice. Let's talk about another common internal habit: replaying mistakes. Most people relive errors repeatedly. They analyze emotionally instead of analytically. They attach identity to outcome. I failed becomes I am a failure. That is not reflection. That is self-sabotage. Emotionally intelligent reflection is structured. You ask 3 questions. What happened? What can I adjust? What will I do differently next time? Then you stop. No rumination, no emotional punishment. Learning requires clarity, not guilt. Guilt is emotional noise. Adjustment is useful signal. That's the difference between growth and stagnation. Replace drama with direction. Let's address anticipation anxiety, another place where inner dialogue causes damage. Before an important event, the mind predicts everything that could go wrong. This feels like preparation. It isn't. It's emotional rehearsal of failure. Preparation is behavioral. Worry is mental repetition without action. Emotionally intelligent individuals prepare physically and think minimally. They review what they can control. They ignore what they cannot. They do not emotionally simulate disaster. Because imagined stress drains real energy, you don't need their permission to stop rehearsing fear. Instead, you rehearse process. What do I need to execute? What matters most? What's within control? These questions create clarity. Clarity reduces emotional volatility. Now let's talk about language. The words you use internally matter more than the words you speak externally. If your internal language is absolute, your emotions will be extreme. Words like always, never, ruined, impossible amplify pressure artificially. Emotionally intelligent language is precise. This is difficult instead of this is impossible. I need more time instead of I can't handle this. This needs adjustment instead of this is a disaster. Precision regulates emotion. Exaggeration destabilizes it. Watch behavior, not words. And that includes your own words to yourself. You must observe how you speak internally and correct it deliberately. This is not automatic. It's trained. Here's a practical exercise. For the next week, you interrupt any internal statement that sounds emotional and rewrite it in operational terms. Not, I'm overwhelmed. Instead, I need to prioritize. Not, this is stressful. Instead, this requires focus. Not, I'm stuck. Instead, I need a different approach. You're not lying to yourself. You're translating emotion into action language. And action language produces movement. Movement reduces emotional buildup. Pause is power. Let's go deeper. Inner dialogue also determines how you interpret other people's behavior. If your mind is defensive, you will see offense everywhere. If your mind is grounded, you will see information instead of attack. This is why emotional intelligence must be internal first. Otherwise, you misread the world. Once you stabilize that internal voice, you notice something surprising. External events stop feeling personal. You see them as situations to navigate, not judgments to survive. That mental separation is freedom, because now your state is self-generated, not externally triggered, and self-generated stability is what allows consistent performance. Consistency builds trust. Trust builds influence. Influence builds opportunity, all starting from how you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. You have a choice. You can let your mind create emotional storms, or you can train it to create direction. Once you gain control over that internal narrative, another level of discipline becomes possible, because now you're not waiting to feel motivated. You can act regardless of mood. And that is where emotional intelligence transforms into something even more powerful: emotional discipline. Chapter 7. Emotional discipline beats motivation. Every time. Most people are waiting to feel ready. They want motivation. They want confidence. They want the emotional surge that makes action feel easy. So they wait. They wait to feel focused. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to feel certain. And while they wait, nothing happens. Because motivation is unreliable. It rises. It falls. It disappears exactly when pressure appears. That's why emotionally intelligent people do not depend on motivation. They build discipline instead. It's not about how you feel. It's about what you do despite how you feel. That's the key. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is behavioral. Emotion changes constantly. Behavior can be trained. You have a choice. You can act when you feel like it, or you can act because you decided to. Only one of those creates consistency. And consistency is where emotional intelligence becomes visible in your life. Let's understand why motivation fails. Motivation is tied to reward anticipation. Your brain releases energy when something feels exciting or new. But once difficulty appears, that chemical support fades. Now you're left with the task and no emotional fuel. This is where most people stop. They assume the loss of motivation means something is wrong. It doesn't. It means the real work has begun. Emotionally intelligent individuals expect this drop. They don't interpret it emotionally. They interpret it structurally. They switch from feeling mode to execution mode. That transition is what separates performers from procrastinators. Replace drama with direction. Instead of saying, "I don't feel motivated," you say, "What is the next action?" Small, clear, immediate. Because discipline is built through movement, not emotion. Let's make this practical. Imagine you need to prepare for something important. The untrained mind negotiates, "I'll start later. I need to get into the right mindset. I'll do it when I have more energy." This is emotional bargaining, and bargaining destroys momentum. Emotionally intelligent behavior removes negotiation. You don't debate with mood. You begin. 5 minutes, 1 step, 1 action. That's it. Action generates clarity faster than thinking ever will. Pause is power. You pause the emotional resistance, then you act anyway. And once action begins, resistance weakens. This is why discipline often feels harder to start, but easier to sustain. Motivation is the opposite. Easy to start. Impossible to rely on. You don't need their permission to act without enthusiasm. You don't need to feel excited to be effective. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about high performers. They are not always driven. They are not always confident. They are consistent. They built routines that operate independently of mood. That's emotional intelligence applied to behavior. Let's talk about structure. Emotionally intelligent people reduce emotional decision-making by designing predictable habits. Same start time. Same preparation pattern, same execution rhythm. Why? Because every decision you eliminate reduces emotional interference. If you rely on deciding every day, emotion will interfere every day. If behavior is pre-decided, emotion becomes irrelevant. That's not rigidity, that's efficiency. You conserve mental energy for thinking, not negotiating with yourself. You have a choice. Build systems, or keep depending on feelings. One creates progress, the other creates cycles. Let's address another emotional trap, perfectionism. Many people delay action because they want to feel completely ready. That is not discipline. That is emotional avoidance disguised as standards. Emotionally intelligent individuals value completion over emotional comfort. They begin before they feel ready. They adjust while moving, because progress regulates emotion better than hesitation ever can. Watch behavior, not words. Your behavior reveals whether you are disciplined or just motivated temporarily. Now let's connect this to resilience. When you act consistently regardless of mood, you prove something to yourself. You prove you can function without emotional support. That builds confidence far deeper than motivation ever could. Motivation says, "I can do this today." Discipline says, "I can do this any day." That certainty stabilizes your emotional baseline. You stop fearing difficult days because your system doesn't depend on them being easy. This is how emotional intelligence becomes toughness. Not loud toughness, reliable toughness. The kind that shows up even when energy is low, when recognition is absent, when progress feels slow. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. That phrase matters. Emotionally reactive people escape discomfort. Emotionally disciplined people stay engaged. And staying engaged compounds results invisibly. Let's build another simple behavior. When you notice yourself saying, "I'll do it later," replace it with, "Start now. Adjust later." That phrase interrupts delay. Because delay is emotional, starting is behavioral. Once you start, you shift back into control. You don't need their permission to operate this way. You're not waiting for approval. You're not waiting for inspiration. You're building reliability. And reliability earns trust from others and from yourself. Now, something important happens once discipline becomes consistent. You create mental space, because you are no longer fighting yourself constantly. And that space allows you to apply emotional intelligence more precisely in moments that matter most. But to do that, you must master one final foundational skill. You must learn how to use silence intentionally. Because silence, when used correctly, is not absence. It is strategy. You've learned to act without emotion controlling you. Now you must learn to communicate without filling every space emotionally. Chapter 8. Master the strategic pause. You already learned that pause creates control. Now you must learn how to use that pause deliberately in communication. Because silence, used correctly, is one of the most powerful emotional intelligence tools you have. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. They rush to fill it. They explain too much. They repeat themselves. They talk to relieve their own tension. But when you rush to fill silence, you give away information. You give away confidence. You give away control. Emotionally intelligent people don't fear silence. They use it. That's the key. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is space. And space forces clarity. You have a choice. You can talk to reduce discomfort, or you can pause to increase effectiveness. Let's look at what happens when you answer too quickly. You haven't fully processed the question. You haven't evaluated your tone. You haven't chosen your words intentionally. So you default to emotional language. Fast answers often become defensive answers, or overly detailed answers, or uncertain answers, and once spoken, they cannot be adjusted. Pause is power. A measured pause gives you 3 advantages instantly. You think. You regulate emotion. You signal confidence. People interpret calm pauses as authority, not hesitation, because confidence is comfortable with silence. Insecurity rushes to escape it. You don't need their permission to take a second. Let's apply this to a real scenario. Someone challenges your idea publicly. An emotional reaction would defend immediately. But a strategic pause changes the entire dynamic. You breathe. You look at them. You take a moment. Now the room shifts attention toward you, because everyone is waiting. And when you finally respond, your words carry more weight simply because you didn't rush. This is not manipulation. It's emotional regulation made visible. The pause gave you control over yourself, and control over yourself created influence over the moment. Watch behavior, not words. People remember how you respond under pressure far more than what you say. Now let's talk about listening. Most people don't listen. They prepare replies. That habit destroys emotional intelligence because you miss emotional data. When you pause instead of interrupting, you allow the other person to reveal more. They clarify. They expand. They often answer their own question. Silence invites information, and information is leverage. Emotionally intelligent communicators understand this. They speak less. They learn more. They respond better. Replace drama with direction. Instead of trying to control conversations through words, You control them through pacing. Pacing is influence. If you slow the tempo, others slow down. If you remain composed, others regulate. If you pause, others think. You set the rhythm. Let's address an important misconception. Pausing is not about being passive. It is active control. You are using time intentionally rather than emotionally. This applies not just to speaking, but to decision-making. Emotionally reactive people decide fast to escape uncertainty. Emotionally intelligent people delay just long enough to think clearly. Not procrastination. Deliberate timing. You must learn the difference. You have a choice. React to end discomfort quickly, or pause to produce a better outcome. Only one builds long-term credibility. Now, let's train this skill behaviorally. In your next 5 conversations, practice this rule. Never respond immediately to anything important. Let there be a breath, a second, a visible moment of thought. You are not performing. You are recalibrating your nervous system. That small pause prevents emotional spillover, and over time, this becomes natural. Your communication becomes cleaner, shorter, more intentional. You stop over-explaining. Over-explaining is usually emotional, not informative. People explain too much when they seek validation or fear misunderstanding. But concise speech signals confidence in your message. Silence supports that confidence. You don't need their permission to be brief. Now let's connect this back to emotional control. When you pause externally, you reinforce discipline internally. Your brain learns that it does not need to react instantly. That learning carries into every area of life. Stressful moment, pause. Unexpected problem, pause. Emotional trigger, pause. The pause becomes your default instead of reaction. And that default is where emotional intelligence becomes automatic. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. Because mastering this skill requires repetition in ordinary situations. You practice pauses in small talk, in emails, in daily decisions. So when high-pressure moments arrive, you don't need to remember what to do. Your system already knows. That is emotional conditioning in your favor. Now you've built observation. You've reframed emotion as data. You've detached from approval. You've disciplined action. You've mastered silence. But there is another challenge waiting. Because even if you remain calm and deliberate, the world around you will still produce emotional noise. And if you absorb that noise, it will undo your progress. So the next step is learning how to remain steady, even when others are not. Chapter 9. Don't absorb other people's chaos. No matter how disciplined you become, you will still spend most of your life around people who are not. People who rush, people who panic, people who complain, people who react emotionally to everything. And if you are not careful, their emotional state will become your emotional state. This is one of the biggest hidden drains on performance. It's not your problems that exhaust you, it's absorbing everyone else's. That's the key. Emotional intelligence is not only about regulating yourself in isolation, it's about maintaining regulation in unstable environments. You have a choice. You can participate in emotional chaos, or you can observe it without joining it. Most people join automatically. Someone is stressed, so they become stressed. Someone is angry, so they become defensive. Someone is urgent, so they abandon clarity and rush too. This is emotional contagion again. But this time, you must actively resist it. Pause is power. The pause allows you to recognize, this emotion is theirs. I don't have to carry it. That sentence alone can change how you move through difficult environments. You don't need their permission to stay grounded. Let's make something clear. Not absorbing chaos does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop internalizing what isn't yours to manage. There's a difference between empathy and emotional adoption. Empathy understands. Adoption takes ownership. Emotionally intelligent people understand without adopting. They listen fully. They respond thoughtfully. but they do not let someone else's emotional spike dictate their internal state. Because once you absorb it, your decision-making degrades. Clarity disappears. Reaction returns. You lose the advantage you built. Watch behavior, not words. When people are overwhelmed, they often want validation of their emotion more than solutions. If you mirror their intensity, you escalate the problem. If you remain steady, you create contrast. And contrast helps regulate the situation. Your calm becomes an anchor. This is why emotionally intelligent individuals are often described as grounding to be around. Not because they solve everything, because they don't amplify instability. Let's look at a common scenario. A coworker approaches you frustrated, speaking quickly, listing problems, expecting urgency. If you match their speed, you inherit their stress. If instead you slow your responses, lower your tone, and ask structured questions, you shift the interaction. You bring order where there was noise. That's influence again. You are not controlling them. You are controlling what you contribute. And what you contribute shapes the outcome. You have a choice. Let's address another trap: emotional responsibility. Many people believe they must fix how others feel. They try to calm, reassure, solve, and carry everything emotionally. This leads to exhaustion. You are responsible for your behavior, not for regulating everyone else's emotions. That boundary is essential. Without it, emotional intelligence turns into emotional burden. And burden eventually leads to resentment or burnout. You don't need their permission to maintain boundaries. Boundaries are not rejection. They are clarity about where your control ends. Here's a practical mental shift. Instead of asking, "How do I make this person less stressed?" ask, "What is the most stable way I can respond?" You control your response, not their reaction. And stable responses often reduce chaos naturally, but even when they don't, you remain effective. Replace drama with direction. Now let's talk about urgency culture. Many environments reward visible busyness and emotional intensity. Everything feels like an emergency, but emotionally intelligent people distinguish between real urgency and emotional urgency. Real urgency requires action. Emotional urgency demands reaction. They are not the same. If you treat every emotional signal as urgent, you destroy prioritization. So you must evaluate before engaging. Is this actually time-sensitive, or is it emotionally charged? That question protects your focus. Pause is power. It allows evaluation before participation. Another important behavior is emotional non-engagement. This does not mean ignoring people. It means refusing to escalate tone. If someone becomes sharp, you stay measured. If someone complains excessively, you redirect to solutions. If someone tries to provoke, you remain neutral. You are not suppressing emotion. You are declining escalation. That refusal often diffuses situations faster than argument ever could, because emotional reactions require reinforcement. Without reinforcement, they lose energy. This is how emotionally intelligent individuals avoid unnecessary conflict without avoiding accountability. They stay present. But they don't fuel dysfunction. You have a choice. And this choice becomes easier with practice. Start noticing when your mood changes because of someone else. That awareness alone is powerful. It shows you where you're absorbing instead of observing. Then you consciously reset. Slow breath. Relax posture. Return to your pace. You reclaim your emotional baseline. This is a skill, not personality, not temperament. Skill. And like every skill, it strengthens with repetition. Over time, you become less reactive to external volatility. You don't feel pulled into every conversation emotionally. You begin operating from internal steadiness rather than external pressure. That steadiness is what allows long-term focus and resilience. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process, because the world will not become calmer for you. You must become calmer within it. Now that you can maintain your state regardless of external emotion, you're ready for the next evolution. Because emotional intelligence is not only defensive, it is also strategic. You don't just regulate emotion, you learn when and how to express it intentionally. Chapter 10. Use emotion with precision, not suppression. By now, you've learned how to pause, how to observe, how to stop absorbing chaos. But emotional intelligence is not about becoming emotionless. It's not about shutting feelings down. It's not about acting robotic. And it's definitely not about pretending nothing affects you. That's suppression. Suppression is not control. Suppression is avoidance. And avoidance always leaks eventually. The goal is not to remove emotion. The goal is to use emotion deliberately. That's the key. Emotion is powerful energy. Undirected, it creates reaction. Directed, it creates influence. You have a choice. You can express emotion accidentally, or you can express it intentionally. Most people express emotions as they arise. Frustrated, it shows immediately. Excited, they oversell. Disappointed, their tone drops. They believe this is authenticity. But unfiltered emotion makes you predictable. Predictability weakens influence. Emotionally intelligent individuals decide when emotion is useful. They don't eliminate it. They deploy it. Watch behavior, not words. Let's look at an example. A leader addressing a team after a setback. If they show uncontrolled frustration, the team feels threatened. If they show no emotion at all, the team feels disconnected. But if they show measured seriousness and controlled urgency, the team understands both accountability and direction. That's precision. The emotion matches the purpose. Not too much, not too little. Exactly enough to reinforce the message. Replace drama with direction. Emotion should support communication, not overwhelm it. This applies in everyday interactions too. You don't need to match someone else's emotional level to connect. Connection is built through understanding, not imitation. If someone is upset, you acknowledge calmly. If someone is excited, you engage without losing clarity. You regulate the intensity instead of mirroring it. You don't need their permission to stay balanced. Let's address why people struggle with this. Many believe controlling emotion means hiding truth. But emotional intelligence is about expressing truth cleanly. Clean emotion is specific. Uncontrolled emotion is scattered. Clean emotion sounds like, I'm concerned about the timeline. Let's refocus. Uncontrolled emotion sounds like, this is getting out of hand. We're falling behind. Same issue, different impact. One creates direction, the other spreads tension. Pause is power. It gives you time to decide what emotional tone actually serves the outcome. Another mistake is emotional dumping. People release feelings just to relieve pressure, not to solve anything. This may feel good temporarily, but it transfers emotional burden to others. Emotionally intelligent individuals process privately first, then communicate purposefully. They don't speak just because they feel. They speak because they've decided. That discipline protects relationships and credibility. You have a choice. Express emotion to discharge it, or express emotion to move things forward. Only one creates progress. Now let's talk about enthusiasm, because precision applies to positive emotion too. Overexcitement can reduce perceived stability. If everything is amazing, urgent, or critical, people stop taking signals seriously. Measured enthusiasm, on the other hand, builds trust. It shows confidence without exaggeration. This is why emotionally intelligent communicators vary emotional intensity intentionally. They don't operate at one volume all the time. They adjust. That adjustment creates contrast. Contrast creates attention. It's the difference between noise and signal. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. Because this skill takes conscious calibration at first. Before responding emotionally, ask, what outcome do I want this emotion to support? That question changes everything. It moves emotion from impulse to instrument. Let's build a behavioral rule you can use immediately. Never express emotion at its peak. Wait until it stabilizes. Peak emotion is rarely precise. Stabilized emotion can be directed. This doesn't mean delaying for hours. Sometimes it's just 1 minute, one breath, one pause. But that pause gives you ownership. You don't react, you choose. And choice is the foundation of emotional intelligence. Over time, people begin experiencing you differently. They don't see emotional swings. They see consistency with depth. They know when you express something, it's intentional, not impulsive. That makes your words carry more weight. Because controlled emotion is credible emotion. You don't need their permission to communicate this way. Now you've learned not just to regulate emotion, but to apply it strategically. But emotional precision alone is not enough for long-term growth. Because life will continue to present frustration, delay, and difficulty. And your ability to handle those without losing structure determines whether this skill becomes permanent. So the next step is building endurance, not physical endurance, emotional endurance. Chapter 11. Build frustration tolerance. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they cannot tolerate frustration long enough to succeed. They want progress to feel smooth. They want effort to feel rewarding immediately. They want results to confirm they're on the right path. But real growth rarely feels good while it's happening. It feels slow, uncertain, repetitive, sometimes invisible. And if you cannot regulate your response to that discomfort, you abandon the process too early. That's the key. Emotional intelligence is not just about handling intense moments. It's about staying steady during long stretches of difficulty. You have a choice: escape frustration or build capacity for it. Only one leads to mastery. Let's examine what frustration actually is. Frustration is the emotional response to blocked progress. Your brain expected movement. It didn't get it, so it signals irritation to push you to change something. That signal is useful, but most people interpret it emotionally instead of strategically. They think, this isn't working. Maybe I'm not good at this. This shouldn't be this hard. Those interpretations create discouragement. But emotionally intelligent individuals reinterpret frustration differently. They see it as confirmation of effort. Friction means you are working against resistance. Resistance means the activity matters. Replace drama with direction. Instead of asking, why is this so hard? Ask, what does this require that I haven't adjusted yet? That question turns frustration into feedback. Pause is power. It prevents emotional quitting and allows analytical adjustment. Let's talk about impatience. Modern environments reward speed, but meaningful development requires repetition. Skill building is rarely exciting after the first attempt. It becomes mechanical, predictable, demanding. And that's where many people disengage emotionally. They chase novelty instead of consistency. Emotionally intelligent people expect boredom and difficulty. They don't interpret those feelings as signals to stop. They interpret them as signals to continue. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. This phrase matters more than you think, because emotional escape looks harmless. Checking distractions, switching tasks, convincing yourself you'll return later. But repeated escape trains avoidance, and avoidance weakens emotional endurance. You must practice staying, not dramatically, just steadily. You don't need their permission to continue when something feels uncomfortable. You don't need emotional validation to persist. Persistence is behavioral, not emotional. Let's bring this into real-world performance. A professional working toward a major goal will face weeks where progress feels minimal. An emotionally reactive mindset interprets this as failure. An emotionally intelligent mindset tracks inputs, not feelings. Did I show up? Did I execute the process? Did I adjust where necessary? If yes, progress is occurring even if it isn't visible yet. This shift protects motivation from emotional volatility, because now success is measured by consistency, not mood. Watch behavior, not words. Your behavior during frustrating periods determines your trajectory far more than your enthusiasm during easy ones. Let's talk about emotional stamina. Just like physical endurance, emotional endurance grows through exposure. You don't build tolerance by avoiding discomfort. You build it by remaining engaged while discomfort exists. This does not mean pushing recklessly. It means learning to function without emotional relief, working when it's repetitive, continuing when it's unclear, adjusting without dramatizing setbacks. That repetition strengthens regulation. Over time, frustration loses its intensity because your brain learns it is not a threat. It's just part of the process. You have a choice. Treat discomfort as danger, or treat discomfort as training. Only one builds resilience. Now let's address comparison, one of the fastest ways to amplify frustration. When you measure your progress emotionally against others, you distort reality. You see outcomes, not effort. Results, not repetitions. This creates unnecessary emotional pressure. Emotionally intelligent individuals compare behavior to standards, not outcomes to others. They ask, am I executing consistently? Am I improving incrementally? That keeps focus internal. An internal focus stabilizes emotion. You don't need their permission to move at your own pace. Let's create a behavioral anchor you can use. When frustration rises, instead of stopping, reduce the scope. Don't quit the task, shrink it. Work 5 more minutes. Complete 1 more repetition. Solve 1 small part. Small continuation prevents emotional shutdown, and continuation builds identity. You begin seeing yourself as someone who stays engaged. identity formed through behavior is stronger than identity formed through intention. Pause is power. It gives you the space to choose continuation instead of withdrawal. Over time, this becomes automatic. You don't panic when progress slows. You don't abandon effort because it's difficult. You remain steady, and steadiness compounds into long-term capability. This is where emotional intelligence starts looking like toughness from the outside. But internally, it's simply regulation repeated many times. You stayed, you adjusted, you continued. Now you've built the endurance required to sustain effort. But there is still one major emotional obstacle left to address. Because even with endurance, many people lose control the moment their ego feels threatened. Feedback, criticism, correction. If you cannot separate ego from information, growth stops immediately. So the next step is learning how to receive input without emotional distortion. Chapter 12. Separate ego from feedback. At some point, no matter how disciplined you become, someone will challenge you. They will question your work. They will disagree with your decision. They will point out something you missed, and in that moment, you will feel it. That internal tightening, that urge to defend, that instinct to explain before fully listening. That is ego reacting. Ego is not confidence. Ego is emotional protection of identity. And if you cannot separate ego from feedback, you cannot improve consistently. That's the key. Emotionally intelligent people don't ask, "Do I like this feedback?" They ask, "Is there something useful here?" You have a choice. Protect how you feel, or improve how you perform. You cannot do both at the same time. Most people defend automatically. They interrupt, they justify, they explain context before understanding the point. They believe they are clarifying, but what they are actually doing is resisting information. And resistance slows growth more than lack of ability ever will. Pause is power. The pause allows you to hear without reacting. Let the feedback finish. Let the words settle. Don't rush to respond. Because the first emotional reaction is rarely the most accurate one. Emotionally intelligent individuals treat feedback like data, not praise, not attack. Data. Some of it is useful, some of it is not, but none of it needs to become emotional. Watch behavior, not words. If you observe highly effective people, you'll notice something. They ask follow-up questions instead of defending themselves. Can you show me where that created confusion? What would improvement look like to you? Where should I adjust first? These responses signal openness without surrendering confidence. They turn criticism into collaboration. That shift changes how others interact with you. Instead of escalating, conversations become constructive. Replace drama with direction. Feedback is directional. Ego makes it personal. And once something feels personal, clarity disappears. Let's address why ego reacts so strongly. Your brain links competence to identity. So when something you did is questioned, it feels like you are being questioned. But that connection is false. Behavior can be adjusted. Identity does not need defending. Emotionally intelligent individuals separate the two. They see performance as flexible, not fixed. This makes correction easier to accept, because correction is no longer threatening who they are. You don't need their permission to learn in public. You don't need to appear flawless to remain credible. In fact, people trust those who adjust more than those who pretend certainty. Let's bring this into a real scenario. You present an idea and someone points out a flaw. An ego-driven reaction would be, "That's not what I meant. You're misunderstanding. We already considered that." Now the discussion becomes defensive. An emotionally intelligent reaction would be, "That's worth examining. Let's look at that piece." No emotional friction, just evaluation. This keeps the focus on solving, not protecting. And over time, that behavior builds a reputation for adaptability. Adaptability is a core advantage in complex environments. You have a choice: defend your past decisions or improve your next ones. Let's talk about filtering feedback. Separating ego doesn't mean accepting everything blindly. Emotional intelligence includes discernment. You evaluate feedback based on relevance and evidence, not tone. Sometimes delivery is poor, but insight is valuable. Sometimes delivery is polished, but insight is shallow. If you react emotionally to delivery, you may miss useful information. So you train yourself to extract value regardless of presentation. That's discipline. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. Because learning requires repeated exposure to correction, and correction always carries some emotional discomfort. But as your tolerance grows, feedback loses its sting. It becomes normal input. Another important shift: you stop needing immediate validation after receiving criticism. Many people rush to prove themselves quickly. Emotionally intelligent individuals adjust quietly and let results speak later. They don't argue for competence, they demonstrate it over time. That patience strengthens credibility far more than debate ever could. Pause is power. It gives you time to improve instead of react. Now let's build a practical habit. Whenever you receive feedback, follow 3 steps before responding. Listen fully, clarify specifics, decide what to apply. No defense, no justification, just process. This structure keeps emotion from hijacking the moment. Over time, this becomes automatic. You stop fearing feedback. You start using it strategically, and that mindset accelerates growth because you are no longer slowed by emotional resistance. Now, you can receive input without distortion. You can endure frustration without quitting. You can act without waiting for motivation. The next evolution is decision-making, because emotional clarity must translate into decisive action. Otherwise, awareness stays theoretical. You've learned how not to react. Now you must learn how to decide with precision. Chapter 13. Make decisions. Without emotional fog, you can control reactions, you can observe emotions, you can accept feedback without ego. But if your decisions are still emotional, everything you built becomes unstable. Because life is shaped not by intentions, but by decisions repeated over time. And most poor decisions are not logical failures, they are emotional ones. That's the key. People rarely lack information. They lack clarity because emotion is distorting the information they already have. Fear makes them delay. Excitement makes them rush. Doubt makes them hesitate. Pressure makes them choose poorly just to escape discomfort. Emotion becomes fog, and fog reduces visibility. You have a choice. Decide to relieve emotion, or decide to produce results. Only one leads to progress. Emotionally intelligent individuals do not eliminate emotion before deciding. They prevent emotion from leading the decision. Pause is power. The pause allows you to separate feeling from evaluation. You acknowledge the emotion, then you set it aside temporarily, not ignored, not suppressed, just not driving. Let's look at what emotional decision-making sounds like internally. I need to fix this now. This feels risky. Maybe I should wait. I don't want to deal with the consequences. These are emotional motivations, not strategic ones. They are about comfort, not outcome. Emotionally intelligent thinking asks different questions. What are the facts? What are the options? What produces the best long-term result? That structure clears the fog. Replace drama with direction. Decision-making must be directional, not emotional. Let's bring this into a common real-world scenario. Someone receives an unexpected opportunity. Emotion says yes immediately because it feels exciting. But excitement is not evaluation. Another person says no immediately because it feels uncertain. But fear is not evaluation either. Emotionally intelligent individuals slow the moment down. They gather context. They examine alignment. They ask what commitment is actually required. They don't rush to capture or avoid. They decide deliberately. You don't need their permission to take time before deciding. Urgency is often emotional pressure, not real necessity. Let's talk about delayed decisions. Some people confuse avoidance with thoughtfulness. They say they are thinking about it, but they are really postponing discomfort. Emotional intelligence requires decisive action once clarity is reached. You don't delay because it feels uncomfortable. You move because the direction is clear. Indecision is often emotional self-protection, but prolonged indecision creates more stress than action ever does. Watch behavior, not words. Your decision patterns reveal whether you are operating from clarity or avoidance. Let's introduce a simple framework emotionally intelligent people use. Slow thinking beats fast regret. When stakes are meaningful, you slow the process enough to think fully. You don't add complexity, you remove emotional urgency. You identify what actually matters, what is reversible, what is not, what supports your long-term direction. These questions stabilize thinking, because decisions made calmly are easier to execute confidently. You have a choice: react to pressure or respond to priorities. Let's address another emotional distortion: the need for certainty. Many people delay decisions waiting to feel completely sure. That feeling rarely arrives. Certainty is emotional comfort, not logical confirmation. Emotionally intelligent individuals act with partial information once the path is reasonable. They don't need to feel perfect. They need to be aligned. Action refines clarity faster than waiting ever will. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process, because decision-making improves through repetition, not contemplation. Every decision you make thoughtfully strengthens your ability to make the next one faster and cleaner. Pause is power. It ensures your decision is chosen, not triggered. Let's build a behavioral habit. Before making any meaningful decision, ask yourself, if I were completely calm, what would I do? That question neutralizes emotional spikes. It reconnects you with values instead of reactions. Then you act, not dramatically, not impulsively, deliberately. Over time, this becomes your natural rhythm. You stop second-guessing constantly. You stop revisiting decisions emotionally. You trust your process because it is structured, and trust reduces mental noise. Now your emotional intelligence is no longer just defensive or reflective. It is operational. You think clearly, you choose deliberately, you act consistently. But to sustain this level, you must develop something deeper than occasional control. You must build emotional consistency, because mastery is not doing this once. It's doing it repeatedly until it becomes identity. Chapter 14. Train emotional consistency, not occasional control. Anyone can stay calm once. Anyone can pause during one difficult conversation. Anyone can respond thoughtfully on a good day. That's not mastery. Mastery is doing it again tomorrow, and the next day, and on the day when you're tired, distracted, or under pressure. That's the key. Emotional intelligence is not a performance. It's a pattern. If your control only appears occasionally, it's not yet a skill. It's a coincidence. You have a choice. Practice regulation only when it feels important, or build consistency until it becomes automatic. Only one creates lasting change. Most people treat emotional control like an emergency tool. They try to use it only in high-stakes situations. But skills built under pressure are unreliable. Emotionally intelligent individuals train in ordinary moments. They regulate small irritations. They pause during routine conversations. They maintain structure in everyday decisions, because repetition wires behavior into identity. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. Let's understand why consistency matters neurologically. Your brain strengthens what you repeat, not what you intend. If you react 9 times and regulate once, your brain learns reaction. If you regulate daily, even in minor moments, calm becomes default. This is conditioning, not motivation, not willpower. Conditioning. Pause is power. And when that pause happens automatically, you no longer have to force it. Let's look at a common failure pattern. Someone practices emotional intelligence briefly, sees improvement, then relaxes the discipline. They assume the skill is permanent. But without repetition, old habits return quickly, because emotional patterns are deeply learned. Emotionally intelligent people understand this. They treat regulation like physical training. Not something you achieve once, something you maintain continuously. You don't need their permission to practice this daily. You don't need a dramatic situation to justify it. The smallest moment is enough. Waiting in line, handling inconvenience, receiving an unexpected message. Each is an opportunity to reinforce control. Watch behavior, not words. Consistency is visible through behavior patterns, not declarations of intent. Let's build a structure for this. Emotionally intelligent individuals rely on routines to stabilize emotion. Morning structure, work rhythms, deliberate transitions between tasks. These routines reduce emotional variability by reducing decision fatigue. If you don't decide constantly, you don't react constantly. Structure protects stability. You have a choice. Rely on mood to shape your day, or rely on systems to guide it. Systems create predictability. Predictability creates calm. Replace drama with direction. Let's talk about recovery. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. You will still have moments where emotion overrides discipline. That's normal. The difference is how quickly you return to regulation. Emotionally reactive individuals spiral. Emotionally intelligent individuals reset. They notice, they pause, they correct. No self-judgment, no emotional storytelling, just return to process. That quick recovery is itself a sign of mastery, because consistency includes returning, not just maintaining. Pause is power. It gives you a reset point at any moment. Let's apply this to long-term growth. When emotional regulation becomes consistent, something shifts internally. You stop experiencing life as unpredictable emotional swings. You experience it as manageable variation. Challenges still exist. Stress still appears, but your baseline remains steady. That steadiness allows deeper focus. You spend less energy regulating yourself and more energy executing what matters. This is where emotional intelligence begins producing disproportionate results, because stability is rare, and rare qualities create strong advantages. Stay in the process, don't escape the process. Over time, this discipline becomes identity. You no longer try to be calm, you are calm. You no longer try to think clearly, you think clearly, because repetition turned effort into instinct. But there is one final step. Emotional intelligence must evolve beyond skill into personal standard. Not something you do, something you refuse to abandon. That is how it becomes permanent. You've trained consistency. Now you must step fully into the identity it creates. Chapter 15. Become the person who cannot be easily shaken. At this point, emotional intelligence is no longer something you understand. It's something you practice. You've learned to pause instead of react, to treat emotions as data, to detach from approval, to act without waiting for motivation, to stay steady while others become chaotic. Now all of it comes together into one outcome. You become difficult to destabilize. That's the key. Not emotionless, not distant, not passive, stable. And stability is one of the rarest traits in a reactive world. You have a choice. Remain someone whose state is controlled by circumstances, or become someone who carries their state into every circumstance. Only one creates real independence. Let's be clear about what this means. Being unshaken doesn't mean nothing affects you. It means nothing controls you without your permission. You still feel pressure. You still face conflict. You still encounter uncertainty. But your response is no longer automatic. You observe first. You choose deliberately. You act intentionally. That sequence becomes identity. Pause is power. And now the pause is no longer effort. It's instinct. Most people never reach this stage because they treat emotional control as situational. They try to stay calm only when they remember. But emotionally intelligent individuals raise their standard. They decide, this is how I operate, everywhere, not sometimes, not when it's convenient, always. That decision changes behavior permanently, because identity drives action more reliably than intention ever will. Watch behavior, not words. If you see someone who remains measured during success, during stress, during disagreement, you are seeing identity, not technique. That is what you are building. Let's talk about resilience. When your emotional state becomes self-directed, setbacks lose their power to derail you. They become events to navigate, not experiences to survive. You don't dramatize obstacles, you assess them. You don't collapse under pressure, you organize under pressure. Replace drama with direction. This is the final shift from emotional management to emotional leadership. You are no longer just regulating yourself. You are setting a standard for every environment you enter. Your steadiness influences conversations. Your clarity improves decisions. Your consistency builds trust over time. Not because you demand authority, because you demonstrate control. You don't need their permission to operate this way. Let's examine how this plays out long term. When you are not easily shaken, you waste less energy recovering from emotional spikes. You make fewer impulsive mistakes. You maintain focus longer than others. You build credibility quietly but continuously. And those advantages compound, not overnight, but relentlessly. Stay in the process. Don't escape the process. Because even at this level, emotional intelligence remains a practice. You maintain it through awareness, through structure, through deliberate response, not perfection. Practice. You will still face moments that test you. Unexpected criticism, uncertainty, pressure that tempts reaction. But now you recognize those moments as opportunities to reinforce who you are, not threats. Training, you have a choice: return to reaction or reinforce discipline. And each time you choose discipline, the identity strengthens, until eventually, emotional control is no longer something you think about. It's simply how you move through the world. Calm when others rush, clear when others react, steady when others hesitate. That is emotional intelligence fully integrated, not as knowledge, as character. And character is what sustains performance when conditions are unpredictable. You have built the gap between stimulus and response. You have filled that gap with awareness, discipline, and choice. Now you carry it forward. Because emotional intelligence is not an achievement. It is a lifelong operating system. And the person who masters it doesn't just navigate life better, they lead it. Emotional intelligence is not something you read about once and admire. It is something you practice until it becomes automatic. Every pause you take instead of reacting, you are training power. Every time you choose clarity over impulse, you are building authority. Every moment you refuse to absorb chaos, you are separating yourself from the average. The world is full of smart people who cannot manage themselves. That is why they stall. That is why they burn out. That is why they never lead. But the person who can stay steady, think clearly, read the moment, and respond with intention becomes rare. And rare individuals create disproportionate results. So starting today, you do not chase emotional comfort. You train emotional control. You do not react. You evaluate. You do not rush. You decide. You do not absorb. You direct. Practice it in conversations. Practice it under pressure. Practice it when it's hardest. Because emotional intelligence is not just a skill, it is your competitive advantage. Now go train it.